So much fun to be back again today with Justin Wells, who is a maker of documentaries and also a professor teaching how to do documentaries. He works in the film business. He is got a book out on documentaries called How to Film Truth. And he is currently working on Storycraft, trying to refine his ideas about Storycraft. And I've been following that on Twitter with some deep interest. So, Justin, I'd love to have you just catch us up with I mean, it's been a couple of years since you've been on here. What have you been doing? What led you to start tackling this Storycraft thing, and what progress have you made so far?
Thanks, Karen. No, it's always great to see you and all the other TLC people. I've been this last semester I was developing a new course that I was teaching, and whenever I do that, I spend a lot of time working on the lectures. So I haven't watched a Paul Vanderklay video in a long time. I haven't,
Me
caught up
either.
with
Me either.
everything you guys are doing.
I couldn't keep
Um,
up. I can't keep up with the corner. Just keeping up with my own stuff is all I can handle. Plus, we've had some family things going on that have required a lot of time. So
yeah.
yeah.
So basically, I, I really wanted to update my understanding of Storycraft. And in particular, there's kind of, two worlds that I'm kind of trying to bring together. And that's Hollywood. You could say Hollywood and people of faith. And there's been, you could think of a bit of a divide between what I call the young Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, George Lucas pipeline tradition, which produced Star Wars, and then Christopher and a guy by the name of Christopher Vogler took that hero's journey mythology theory and applied it to Disney, which produced Aladdin and all these animated movies from the 80s and 90s that did really, really well, Beauty and the Beast and Lion King and stuff. And so that tradition of storytelling that starts with Young and then goes to Campbell and then Lucas and then Disney is you could say I don't know, the philosophical backbone of the methodology of storytelling in Hollywood. And it's been incredibly successful, as you know. And then now I teach at a little evangelical school with super ambitious young kids that want to go into express themselves and tell stories that are going to change the world and exhibit their creativity and their talent. And there's always this kind of question of, well, how much of that Hollywood tradition applies into a worldview of faith and how much doesn't apply? And, should the relationship be? And so that's what I set out to study. I said, I'm going to look into this deeply and I'm going to search around the world. I'm going to find the people who are teaching storycraft with the most success and study under them and figure out how this all relates together with the goal of, as it is with every time I teach a class, if it produces better work, you know, then I know it's working. That's kind of how I road test it. And I think that in the last maybe 6 months or so, I came up with a working, you could say, theory or roadmap that I think harmonizes so much of that, the best of the hero's journey stuff, but also includes some of the blind spots that you have if you're not really open to the faith, meaning, eternal telos side of things, and that you can actually complement the hero's journey with that stuff, and you can have something that's really cool. So that's kind of what I've been up to.
Well, so would you say that this train that started with Young and Campbell and Lucas and Disney, that they've kind of run off the tracks recently because the last number of movies that have been made don't seem to be on the same hero's journey that they were on in the past. Heroes
Yeah,
have heroes have a completely different, let's say, telos now than they used to have. So
Yeah, I for me it's hard for me to talk about trends because it's always a moving target, you know? And
Mhm.
so if something falls flat and it doesn't seem to so the one of those things where you watch it and you go, well, that wasn't very satisfying. It didn't seem to, it was either it was preaching at me, it
Mhm.
was telling me I need to be something different than what I am, or um, it wasn't a proper um there's something in storytelling when you have a crisis choice between a character. If you want to have it be unpredictable, there's two kinds of crisis choices, either two bad choices or two good choices that they get faced with: irreconcilable goods or best bad choice. Now, if you make the choice easy, then people are going to say that that was predictable and it didn't challenge me at all and it wasn't interesting. So if it's between a good choice and a bad choice and you know what they're going to choose, then that's not going to do anything for you. What you need is to make the two choices so compelling, each of them so compelling that the person goes, I have no idea what's going to happen, you know? And what happens when you're sort of like ideologically captured is you don't believe that there are such things as best bad choices in the world. You don't believe that there are such things as irreconcilable goods in the world, like a hierarchy of different goods at different times being appropriate. And so you'll say, well, this is the choice that they're going to make between the good one and the bad one. And I'm already determined what the good one and the bad one is. That's
Mhm.
when we say it feels preachy.
Mhm.
It's like you decided beforehand what it was. But if you go into it and you're saying, here's a real dilemma that I, as a person, as an artist, have between this and this, and that's going to be the crisis choice that my character goes through, you might not know what the answer to that is, you know, and that will create a story where you go into a realm of discovery and you gain wisdom as the storyteller because you're actually asking a question that you really have. You know,
Mhm.
you don't know the answer and you're using this creative process to explore it, and you're doing it with the audience. It's like you're saying to the audience, okay, we're going to look into this together and we're going to explore this. And I don't know where we're going to wind up. We're just going to follow the truth where it leads. That's, I think, the process, the artistic process that can get lost if you um, if you don't think that you need to update your own mental model. My mental model is fine. Don't need to update it. What I need to do is convince everyone else of my mental model. That's when it feels off, I think.
I have so many thoughts about that. um, the mental model thing I want to come back to in a second, but it occurs to me when you're saying that that's also the difference between really deep biblical teaching and shallow teaching. And the churches that Paul Vanderklay is always calling the therapeutic moralistic deism,
Uh,
they seem to have this very shallow, good bad choice, and obviously this is the good, and it doesn't take into account the depth of human anguish over issues and suffering and our weaknesses and our struggles and our failures and all of those things. But a really good deep biblical teaching, I think, has to include something of the teacher himself opening up his own humanity and exploring it at a depth that allows him to or her to see what's really going on there, and then helping the listeners to follow that path so that in our own hearts we're also struggling with our own truth at the same time. So
yeah, there's a passage in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything. There's a time to plant, there's a time
mhm,
to rip up, there's a time to build, there's a time to tear down, etc. That is a perfect passage to illustrate what a story is for.
mhm,
When is it time to plant and when is it time to rip out?
yeah,
When is it time to build and when is it time to tear down? And what is the appropriate relationship between your attitude in doing it what's the right motivation to plant or to tear, and so you're exploring all that stuff in the complex world. And this is what I call Solomonic wisdom. Solomonic wisdom is when Solomon has to figure out which is the legitimate mother, and which is the illegitimate mother, which is the good one and which is the bad one. You know, there's no rule. The reason why it winds up in front of him, because he's the king, is because there's no rule that says when this happens, here's what you do. It's beyond the procedural knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There is no procedure. It's like the recipe. It's like when you're cooking and all of a sudden something happens that's not on the recipe, you know? Like I can remember when we were camping and we figured out that water takes longer to boil when you're at a higher elevation. It's a variable that renders a certain part of that recipe irrelevant. And now you got to improvise. And what does it require for you to improvise? Wisdom, Solomonic wisdom. And this is what the story is supposed to bring you to that point. By the end of the story, you should have, or your hero should have virtue. And virtue is knowing when to plant and when to rip out, knowing the right appropriate relationship to those things.
Yeah, I mean, from the artist standpoint, what happens is that every time you lay down a new stroke, the context has changed. So every single moment you're having to shift your because the context is changing, it's changing what the next move can be. I mean, there's a multitude of moves that can happen, but which ones are going to contribute to the virtue at the end, the beautiful result, is not something that comes through rules, but by principles that you can only gain through wisdom, which is gained through experience, and it's the whole thing. It's exactly like that. But going back to the mental model thing, I noticed that you asked on Twitter if anybody had a painting, a work of art that would illustrate a mental model. And someone brought up the Ce n'est pas un pipe painting.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Yeah.
also thought of a painting that I might use to illustrate that. Would you like to see it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It might take a minute to explain why I think this illustrates it. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a painting that is called Feast in the House of Levi by Paolo Veronese, and it's in the Accademia Gallery in Venice. It's probably, I don't know, 20 to 30 feet wide, maybe 40 feet. I don't know, it's huge. It's just massive. Covers an entire wall in this beautiful art museum. And then it must be another 20 to 25 feet high. And I've been to Venice twice, and both times I spent like an hour just looking at this. The backstory to this painting is that Veronese was given the task to create this for some church or cathedral, and it was supposed to be a painting of the Last Supper. And when he presented this as his Last Supper, he almost got excommunicated because they felt that it wasn't orderly enough. It didn't tell the good story in an appropriate way. But they asked him if he would be willing to change the title of it, and so he changed the title of it to Feast in the House of Levi, and then it was able to be presented somewhere. I don't think it ended up in that cathedral, but it didn't get destroyed anyway. So I'm looking at this painting, trying to understand what's going on here. And I think the mental model is this. When truth is available, most people aren't interested, right? So you can look over here. These guys are there's all kinds of things going on here. There's people with their weapons, there's people in arguing, there's people trading, there's people having discussions about the world, there's somebody pouring wine, there's all this stuff going on. And then you can look over here. There's a clown, there's a jester, there's more arguments, there's people coming in from the side. There's just all this stuff going on. And all around, there's people who aren't paying any attention at all. And then there's this one young boy, and he's
Mhm.
absolutely captivated. And here's where all the action is going on in this painting. So to me, that's a pretty cool mental model. What amazed me is that I think this was painted in the 1600s, maybe, that he had that kind of depth of insight about what really goes on in the world, you know. I just thought that was pretty cool. And then, of course, the religious leaders couldn't see it at all because all they wanted was a Last Supper with everybody lined up in a row. So, anyway.
Right, right. Yeah. So if you think so in the beginning of a story, you can think of your protagonist as embodying the mental model that they've developed, the map of the world that they've developed, which allows them to function in their habitable order, you know, based on previous stories that they've gone through. They've enlarged that map to cover what generally happens and and they have habits which the people over at StoryGrid, who I've been learning from, they call it Worldview 1.0. Worldview 1.0 is, here's generally how I have to operate in the world. And the relationship between cause and effect is pretty predictable. And so I'm good, like but we know that we will project the attunement of our mental model and the actual reality is not by necessity. It can't capture all of reality. There's always going to be things either outside of the mental model or things that you project over within the mental model. So imagine like in your living room, you are going for your goal state to go get a glass of water at night and the lights are turned out, but you've mapped that living room so well. And then you
Mm-hmm.
step on a Lego, you know, that's something that was not in your map, you weren't aware of. It creates a crisis. Then you have to update your map to include the existence of
Mm-hmm.
Legos. That's a micro story, that little
Mm-hmm.
stepping on a Lego. And that's how it works. You go into procedural, you start with propositional knowledge, John Verveke. Here's what my living room is. Then you go into procedural. I've got to figure out what this anomaly is, what's causing this pain, what's the procedure for that. Then you go into perspectival, you change your perspective. Oh, I'm going to have to update this map now, and then you go back into flow state now that you've resolved it, and you can go into participatory knowing again, and your map and the world are more closely attuned and aligned, and now you're in your new wineskins, your updated map. That's like a little microcosm of what goes on in a whole story. Um, it's just that, much bigger things than just a Lego in like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so so you can map. So I have a 5-act structure basically that starts in the ordinary world and goes through the different levels of complexity in the process of maturation and updating your map that follows complexity theory. And I get the StoryGrid people did all of this work for me. They've done so much work in the cognitive science. They are Sean Coyne, the CEO of StoryGrid, is partnering with John Verveke to write a book called, I think it's called Story Principia now, which is going to have all this stuff in it, which is going to be amazing. But basically, you can follow the 4 P's of knowing around this heroic journey, and it also corresponds to complexity theory. So you and I know order and chaos, and you generally know, okay, you start out in habitable order, you go out into chaos. What's the relationship between order and chaos? But in complexity theory, you've got order, complex order, chaos, complicated order, and then I add a fifth one on of harmony, that's when you return back. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so you, for me, what happened with learning all this is that I've always been kind of, yeah, generally I know like how to start a story, how to get them to cross the threshold out from the ordinary world into the extraordinary world. But then there's this fuzzy parts in the middle. I, you just have to feel your way by intuition, I thought. But now I kind of know each act, each movement, like in a symphony, has a certain feeling and it's something that needs to happen in that movement that's natural, in the process of how this character is going to go from childlike ignorance into a virtuous mastery of their world, you know. Um, and so I put it out and I said, okay, this is a perfect way to understand a 5-act story in story structure. And and if you know what mode of knowing, John Verveke's one of the 4 P's of knowing, and what part of complexity theory you're in, and then also the archetypal names for it, the artistic sounding names, then it'll have a feeling to it. You'll go, oh, okay, act 2, that's going to be procedural knowing. That's going to be when they need to figure out what's going on. They need to have a mentor to come in there and say, here's what you do. Wax on, wax off, or in the Matrix, learn Kung Fu, or some kind of games, training, or riddles to solve now that they're out of their familiar world to sort of like toughen up the body for the world outside of your familiar place. So in Bilbo, it's like you got to find your role in the group. And so you got to go check out these trolls. And then he's got to do a game of riddles with Gollum, his shadow. A game of riddles with your own shadow is, well, how come it's not working for me? That's a riddle. So you have to answer these riddles. Or like, for example, a riddle would be when I went to a new job and I got the job. Oh, great. Okay, here I'm starting the job. And there's this guy who just hates me. You know, that's a riddle. What did I do? I just showed up. Turns out he wanted his buddy back in shipping to get that job, but they hired someone with a fancy film degree from outside to get the job. So he's jealous. So then you go, well, okay, to solve the riddle, you have to understand why it's happening, why this conundrum is happening. And then once you solve it, you go, oh, I just have to prove to him that I'm on his side. And now he goes from an enemy to an ally. And that's often what happens in your act 2 is who's my friend? Who's my enemy? These riddles are coming at you and you got to solve the riddles and sort of you're just slowly updating your procedures and your habits. Who's a friend and who's foe in that unfamiliar world. And it fits perfectly with John Verveke's procedural knowing. It's the recipe phase. If it's a cooking story, this would be, okay, I want to make a cake. So you leave home in the sense of, I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to get all the ingredients. I'm going to follow this recipe. So, or you could say, like in the Exodus cycle, it is the law phase. The law phase is, okay, thou shalt and thou shalt not. Well, why? Why? You're not ready to answer that yet. Just do it. Just obey it. Just follow the recipe. If you start questioning the recipe, or like when you're teaching a kid how to play a game, you show the kid, okay, here are all the rules. In the back of your mind, there are going to be exceptions to the rules, but you don't tell the kid that. It's going to confuse the heck out of them. You stick to the rules. If you ever have taught a kid how to play a card game or something, never cheat, never break the rules. Make sure that those rules are absolutely, because then they will get through the procedural stage properly, in that updating of their map. So that would be like a little act 1 and act 2, which for me sharpens up the clarity of how those 2 movements would go in a story.
That really makes me think too about how so often for a new believer, they go through a period of very legalistic perspective on the world, but that's required because you have to kind of understand what is going on before you can understand that there are Solomonic principles that may be large, of a larger scale. So you kind of learn all the rules and then you realize, oh, there really aren't any rules. If
Yes.
you knew that right from the beginning, then the world would be combinatorially explosive at every moment, which is just impossible. So you have to have a through line. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes
And
sense.
so what's interesting is that in the New Testament, they move into the next movement of the story, which is going to move into perspectival knowing, from
Mm-hmm.
procedural to perspectival. And it's very confusing for people. how can you say that the law is abolished, but none of it is unfulfilled? You know, that's like saying, well, how can you say that the recipe doesn't matter anymore, but yet the recipe isn't negated? Well, when you're a chef, you can go beyond the recipe. You know what is behind the recipe. You know why the recipe is it that way. You've embodied and um, metabolized that recipe in such a way that you can now improvise. You know, that would be when you finally get to the end and you become a chef. You've gone through the perspectival act, which is
Mhm.
I call Act 4, so that you can do that. But that's getting ahead of us. Like, so then so once you go through the procedural, then you go into to chaos. So it goes, order, simple order or habitable order, complex order. You're in a more complex world, but you have procedures, you have recipes, you have laws, you have a
Mhm.
mentor. Now, right before the next act, which is the chaos act, the mentor always leaves. They're about to go into Mirkwood Forest, and Gandalf says, "Oh, well, I'm taking off. You guys go through there. Be careful. Don't get off the path." Star Wars, it's like, oh my gosh, Obi-Wan is now gone. What am I going to do? So there's this idea that the procedural, the recipe part leaves or you reach the end of it, or you find a situation like Solomon did, where there is no law for that. You know, that puts you into a state of chaos. So the chaos act is always going to be the to be or not to be act. That's the part in Hamlet, to be or not to be. And it's when you reach the point of going, why are we even doing this in the first place? What was the goal of this? You know, um, in when they're all wandering through Mirkwood Forest, it's like they get lost, they lose the path, they fall asleep. So that sleeping, dream world or nightmare stage, spiders, anything that to do with when you like madness in your mind. What is madness? Weeping
Wizard
and
of Oz is
gnashing.
poppy fields.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, okay, so then they go, why does, Joseph Campbell calls it the belly of the whale. And it's like, okay, I know that that's what you do in a movie. In The Matrix, it's when the Oracle messes with his mind and says, "No, you're not the one. You thought you were the one. You're not the one. Maybe you are the one. No, you're not." And it's all that confusion because there needs to be a shift in perspective. And the shift in perspective is best described with JFK. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And every artist needs to go through that shift where they're shifting the relationship of who's doing what for who. you know so the artist needs to say, like my students that come in, I want to make a movie, I want to be rich, I want to be famous, I want to have honor, I want to have accolades. That's the gold in Treasure Island. It gets them to leave home, or the gold in The Hobbit that gets them to leave home. But when they're halfway through the journey, they have to make a shift from gold. In screenwriting terms, they call it from want to need. I would say from gold to virtue. But it's basically every artist or writer or filmmaker needs to say, ask not what my audience can do for me, ask what I can do for my audience. So you have to realize that I'm here to serve the audience. I'm not here to take from the audience. So J.R.R. Tolkien, when you read that Hobbit, he's talking to a kid at bedtime to impart these wisdom truths to, and you can feel the giving. Sort of, he's made the shift. He's made the perspectival shift.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what the heroic figure needs to learn, is that change in perspective, which is finding their true aim, their true purpose. So they're realizing, oh, it's not so I can get the gold. It's so that I can serve the world. That's my purpose. That's my telos. The tragic figure refuses to make that shift. And that's the difference between a happy ending and a tragic ending.
Well, you're going to have to go over that for me again, because when you got halfway through that sentence, before you got to the tragic figure, I thought, oh, the difference between the preachy model and the not preachy model is that moment right there, right? Refusing to make the shift and instead saying, I am going to nail you to this particular worldview, whether you want it or
Yes.
not. And that's when things start going awry in those movies.
Well, yeah, that is, I call it the double down. The double down is I had an idea of what I think this was before I started on the journey. And no matter how many counterexamples I have or how confusing it gets, I'm never going to give up my original mental model, my original picture of the world. And so that's they call it, about reciprocal opening and reciprocal narrowing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're opening, that means you're saying, well, there's more to the world than I know. And this is what Solomon says. He goes, I'm supposed to judge all these people. They're going to come to me with their problems. I am like a little child. I don't know what I'm going out or if I'm going in. I'm completely clueless. I need you to tell me how to understand the difference between good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then what does God say back to him? He says, well, I thought you were going to ask for riches and I thought you were going to ask for long life, but instead you asked for the knowledge of good and bad to serve the people that you rule. You want to serve them instead of them serving you. And so what is going to happen is you're going to get the wisdom, but also you're going to get the riches and also you're going to get the long life. So the ironic thing is people always come and say, I want the formula for rich and fame. It's like in Kermit the Frog, that movie where he goes, prepare the standard rich and famous contract for Kermit the Frog and company. In when the Muppets go to Hollywood, they're like, we want to be rich and famous. He's like, okay, we'll get the rich and famous contract for you. Um, that's what they want. That's the immediate goal state. But ironically, you have to switch it so that you understand your role and purpose is to serve your audience, and then you'll get the riches and fame. It's just a weird thing that the honor comes only after that switch. And so you almost have to give up the desire for the honor in order for the honor to come. That's the weird perspectival shift in that quadrant. Um, so I think that there is actually, you're right, there is a parallel between the preachy thing and the tragic figure, which is the one thing in common is reciprocal narrowing, going down into your existing,
Mm. Yes,
uh,
yes, yes. That's the common point. Yeah.
not opening up. In the
So,
see the New
so for
Testament.
me, for me
Yeah,
as a
go
painter, the way when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking through the whole process that I go through. So I have an idea, and then I have to gather my materials, and then I start. And then as I start, um, the the first stroke always narrows the choices because before that you can do anything, but after you start laying down paint, then you have to respond to that paint, and then each time you put down more paint, the context is shifting. But you always have to recursively go back to that original idea to bring out of that complex order into the harmony of the original idea. That is always going on. Like in a movie, when you're watching a movie, you can always see these little telltale signs that something, if you go back and watch the movie again, you can see, oh, they dropped that right there so that I could see what was coming, right? And it's very much like that when you're painting. And then there comes a point, which I would call the chaos point with the painting, when it just starts to go awry and something creeps in that's anomalous, that doesn't fit the original idea. And at that point, I can jerry rig it into that original idea and come up with something very stilted and academic and dry, or I can just go with all the accidents and see where they lead me and eventually come back into that complicated order and see the way that all the principles of design might take what I now have and bring it around to the idea, but at a much deeper level, so that the final result is much more harmonious and complex and deep and rich and all of that. So there is that point, which I call the adolescent point in a painting, where you're just so angry with it, you want to scream at it, I hate you, I'm going to throw you out. But then if you remind this is your adolescent child, you can't throw him out. You gotta love this little person So you're kind of giving yourself to the painting.
Mhm.
In your parlance, you're kind of giving yourself to the painting and saying, I will do what it takes to bring this into a harmonious ending.
Yeah. And so all those smart guys up at the Santa Fe Institute that do complex theory,
Mm-hmm.
I've been watching a lot of their videos, and one of the things that they say is that creativity actually comes out of chaos. And
Mm-hmm.
they do brain scans, which will actually back this up. Like if somebody is working on the 9 dot problem and the 9 dot problem
Mm-hmm.
where you got to think outside, where we get the phrase, think outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who has never tried that, and they hook them up to what is it called? An MRI, fMRI, and they look at the brain. And when they figure out that they're supposed to go outside the box to make these lines work with the 9 dot problem, their visual cortex in the back suddenly lights up. That's the aha moment or the epiphany. And it comes after they've given up all hope. They have to try all of the inside the box uh, combinations of lines before they finally say, there's no possible way for this to work. And then they'll think outside the box, you know, and then that visual cortex will light up. That's the epiphany moment. So the climax of that chaotic act is usually needs to have a new epiphany of, oh, this is why I'm doing it. This is my purpose, my direction, my telos. Um, so that they can now use that new insight when they go into the next act. So in the creative process, you could say, if someone doesn't want to go into chaos, that's when we say it doesn't seem like it's a creative thing. It seems, I don't know, bland or predictable. Or we may have different words for, well, that doesn't really do anything for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe because, yeah, actually, creativity, insight, invention comes from chaos. This is why at 3M, when someone is working on a problem using their existing mental model and it's not working, they go have them visit other departments, see what they're doing. It has nothing to do with their thing. And the 3M has the most patents of any company, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading this book a few years ago, but they have more patents, more inventions than anybody because they use this idea that you have to go into chaos, which is outside of whatever, or like when you say, I'm going to sleep on it. I can't figure this out. So the
Mm-hmm.
dream world, you know, and then all of a sudden something comes to you, and it's not something that comes as a result of reasoning through it. It's an epiphany. It's a lightning bolt. It's like, oh my God, how, that's why we use the light bulb for
Mm-hmm.
that.
Have you ever looked at Mandelbrot sets and how they're produced?
No, you're way more advanced on that kind of
Oh,
stuff
do you,
than
you
I
know what a
am.
Mandelbrot set is,
Can you
though?
explain it briefly to me?
I am going to I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to find us one. I'm going to put it on pause for just a second because I think this is very pertinent. So I'm going to screen share for this Mandelbrot set, and you can see this. This is just from Wikipedia, but the idea of a Mandelbrot set, this is a Mandelbrot set right here. And the idea of a Mandelbrot set is that it's a very simple formula that when you recursively, you put a number in there and you recursively run the program, you find out where the edge of chaos is. The stuff that I can't remember which is which, but there's the black and then there's the blue. Okay, the stuff that stays orderly is, I think, maybe that's inside the set, and when it goes into chaos, that's outside the set. And what Mandelbrot discovered was when he was working with a dot matrix printer back in the day, and he just started to notice when he ran this formula over and over again that there was some sort of an image taking shape on his page. And now, of course, with computers, they can get more and more refined on this. But what happens is you can see that this image here is being repeated in these smaller images around the edge. And then you go into even this tiny little thing. Oh, I guess I have to go back to the other viewer. This right here,
Yeah.
you can see how it just opens up until every single part of it keeps opening and opening and opening. And then you have the set again, and then it goes down and it's at the border. It's always at the border where all the creative stuff is going on. And
Mm.
it's that border between what stays within the frame and what goes chaotically outside the frame. It's that very edge right there that's making all this happen. And I'll try to find you something that's a better explanation than what I can do right now. This was his original dot matrix thing right here
Right.
before we had all the complexity stuff that we can do now. But it's a very simple formula. Like right here, it says Z when Z squared plus C, and then you run that thing again with a different C, and the sequence just gets more and more complex. And it's what's outside and what's inside that makes the big difference. But it's that edge of it's the edge of chaos where all the creativity takes place. But I think it's the edge. Peterson always talks about you have the walled city and then outside the walled city, and he shows the my brain. I just had a brain freeze. The
The border, the liminal space.
well, yes, but that is it Zen or Buddhist or whatever,
Oh,
the
yeah.
circle with the
With
wave in
the
the middle
yes, there's a little bit of order in the chaos and a little bit of chaos in the order.
and then
Yeah.
there's the line in between. And
Yeah.
that line in between is that edge between order and chaos. And Peterson talks about the hero is the one who can kind of ride that wave between the two,
Hmm.
that wave
Yeah.
between order and chaos. And so it's that edge of chaos. But the thing I've always found with for myself, the thing that opens up my creativity is to have some really tight constraints for myself, which I think is what happens with a hero. The story gets more and more and more constrained as time goes on, and his options get smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's when the options get the least possible options that you can have that you have to have this moment of insight with, oh, I can do this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me as a painter, I try to narrow, maybe I'm only going to use red and green, and I'm only going to do this one um, picture, and I'm going to do it 20 times. And every time I'm going to have to find new answers to the problem. But I'm within this very tight constraint here.
Yeah. You could say that the role of the author is similar of the person who, the part of you that's constraining what you can do in a painting.
Mm-hmm.
The author, you got to do that to your character. You got to cut off, right? That's not going to work. That's not going to work. You got to be the antagonist in a way
Yeah.
of your character and say, okay, it's like Jonah. Jonah has a mental model in the beginning, and it says, when people do bad things, they should be punished.
Mm.
Okay, then here comes the call that challenges his mental model. And what does he do? He goes down. It's always down, down to Joppa, down to the shipyard, down to the bottom of the ship, down to the bottom of the whale. Okay. So he's getting constrained down and down and down until he needs to have the perspective shift, which is the opening, the reciprocal opening now. Well, I guess I'm going to have to allow for the idea that there is more to the world than just what I think how it should be. This is how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main thing is like the tragic hero is they get married to the should. This is how
Mm-hmm.
it should be. And even if it's good, like in Jonah's case, well, yeah, that is how it should be. But the world that we live in is way bigger than
Mm-hmm.
what we think. And so this is what the Bible is constantly teaching you is that there's things beyond what you think it should be.
Mhm.
There's a larger picture out there. And so his going into chaos is the belly of the whale, where he sings a song which brings it back us back to the beginning of creation. And that's the epiphany, I think, of that story, where he can now redirect his energy and finally go and open up his worldview to include the idea of mercy. So if you think of irreconcilable goods, there you go. That's all right. Which one? Justice or mercy? You know,
Mm. Mhm.
that is a, nobody's going to think, well, that's an easy choice. You know, it's going to be like, wow, like, that's and this is the kind of thing that you bring people to when they're in that crisis part of the story.
Yeah, the really interesting thing about Jonah is that even from the beginning, he knew that God would be merciful, which is why he didn't want to do what. So he
Right.
knew that God's justice is perfect, but his mercy is also perfect. And he knew both of those things from the beginning. He just didn't want to accept the other half. And then at the end, he comes back to being human again, and he still can't accept the other half.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. There's
it's
another mini
yeah,
version, another little story at the end there.
yeah.
But I think in the New Testament, this is constantly the perspectival shift is happening in the New Testament all the time. You know, every character that you see who has an existing expectation of what they think should happen, it gets upset.
Hmm.
It's like, you know, Peter and John and Paul and, all of this you can track. Okay, here's what they thought was going to happen, but they needed new wineskins. They needed a new understanding of the largeness of the world. And so what had to happen is that what they thought was going to happen had to die before them to understand what was beyond, you know. So the little sort of death and resurrection pattern um, is how you learn anything or do anything creative, So
Hmm.
the cosmic pattern and the macro pattern, sort of fractally line up. And so if you kind of just keep in your mind the fact that that's kind of how the world works, that's the grooves of creation or the patterns of creation, then when it happens to you, you don't have to take it quite so seriously, Like I think that you can learn to manage crises as you mature, understanding that it's part of the process. You know, you can say, well, yes, I'm learning to play the guitar and I knew that I was going to hit a wall and question why I'm doing this in the first place. So what
Hmm.
am I going to do? I'm going to push through instead of giving up, And
Hmm.
this is the lesson that the stories teach you is like, yeah, you should expect to hit these walls and go into chaos, but you shouldn't be afraid of chaos. It was, um, chaos is not evil. Again, it's like the Ecclesiastes thing. It's like there's time for this and a time for that. There's a time for order and there's a time for chaos, you know. And creativity or inventiveness, when you need to invent something, that's the time for chaos. So sometimes you have to go find the chaos and say, well, okay, I'm not solving this problem, so I'm going to take a nap. That's finding chaos. That's
Hmm.
losing, your conscious self and going into the dream world because you can't solve the problem.
Yeah, that happens to me with a painting. If I come to a place where I can't solve the problem, because there are always problems, I don't understand why, but you always hit a wall, then I just add chaos. I
Mm.
just throw a bunch more paint on there to make a problem for myself that I have to solve. And then it makes a new problem. It gives me more information than I had before about the problem. There's something about adding chaos that gives you more information about the problem. And then I can work my way back out. And sometimes that has to happen several times. But then it always makes the final result way more complex and interesting than it was to begin with if the chaos hadn't entered, right? So,
Yeah.
and I was going to say about this, there is a time element in everything that between the beginning and the end there has to be time. Time has to be built in there. It's a great thing to say sacrifice is always the answer, but you can't just jump right into that. And even Christ, there's one place in I think it's in the book of John where the people are confronting him and saying, why are you always keeping us in suspense? Why don't you tell us either you are or you aren't? Don't keep us in suspense.
Mhm.
But that suspense is absolutely necessary because otherwise you're not going to process what's happening. You're not going to see what's happening and let it process and change you and transform you, right?
Yeah, you won't metabolize it, you know.
Yeah.
I think of a story, there's so much in the Bible about eating. Eating is one of the most central things. Eating and having that become part of your body. Um, and the idea is the same. Like you can't just have the food nourish you without digesting it. Like it's got to go through
Mhm.
the process. Um, so when so yeah, I would say each of the four types of knowing, propositional, you need that. But that's in the first quadrant. That's at the end of a previous story or the first act. Procedural, you need that too. Like you need to, if you're going to start out doing something, if you're going to learn how to play tennis, it's like, well, here's a forehand, here's a backhand, do this drill, do this. And that's not the time to be questioning it. That's also, I call it the priestly stage of the Exodus cycle. The
Mhm.
priestly stage is ritual, purity, and law, you know, and it's the main focus is obedience. And that's, if you're joining the baseball team, that's what's going to happen. They're going to hit you ground balls and they're going to tell you, we're going to break down your old self and we're going to build it up into this new self. And you just have to do it. And it doesn't make sense because you can't figure out how it applies to the game, but you're in the priestly stage. You're in the procedural stage right now,
So that's boot camp.
Yeah, it would be boot camp. It would be practice. It would be, raw recruits coming in,
Mhm.
and then some kind of a mentor figure, an authority figure, laying out the procedures. But eventually, you are going to have to be in the game, and the coach won't be able to give you the procedure for what to do when you're in the game. That's when you have to go into the fifth act, which is the flow state act and participatory knowing, or I call it the wizard stage. That's Ozzie Smith was called the wizard at shortstop because he could catch it behind his back and flip it. It's like there was no procedure for that. And it's like, no, I just did it because he's he has ingested and metabolized all of those rituals and all of those trainings
Mhm.
and to such a point that he's beyond them, that he can do something brand new that nobody ever thought of before. And it's
Mhm.
perfect. It's this perfect symphonic, harmonic um, attunement to his environment. He's perfectly attuned to that baseball arena, agent arena relationship. So you have to go
Well, I
through those.
noticed that you also call that stage the plenary knowing. What
Well, it's the next act, act five.
I thought you said the wizard stage was Act 5. Is the wizard stage Act 4?
So I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. I
Okay.
misspoke. Act four.
Okay.
Yeah, act four is the climax of the of the story. So you think act
Okay.
one is the ordinary world,
Mm-hmm.
worldview 1.0, mental model 1.0. Act two is going to be your priestly stage, um, procedural knowing, complex order or complexity. Then you go into your chaos stage, and then when you emerge out of that, that's
Which
when
is the
you
prophet stage, right? According to the
yes,
brotherly.
profit like insight,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
truth. That's the truth stage where you have to discover the truth and your true aim. And then the participatory stage, which is your global climax of your movie, of your story, um, is going to be participatory knowing. You're taking all of that, all of the procedures and the true aim that you got from the previous, and you're putting it all together. And you're usually doing that with all of the people that you befriended on the journey, and everything is in harmony. And that's your global climax. That's the part where you get to see them finally put it all together and be a wizard in their world. And then when they return home, like when Bilbo returns home after the journey, this is now to show how the person has changed when they go back into their ordinary environment. And that's what I call plenary, which all of those things together now have been embodied by ingested and metabolized by him, and he now exhibits this virtuous character. And so in The Hobbit, the very thing that he could not stop from happening in the beginning, which was people invading his house and eating all of his stuff and taking all of his
Mhm.
stuff. The same exact thing is happening when he returns. The Slacksville Bagginses are hoarding all of his pillaging. And what does he do? Rather than before saying, "Oh, I don't know what to say to these dwarves. I just have to be polite. I don't have any shadow agency. I can't be stand up to anybody." You know, what does he do? He goes, "Hey, those are my spoons. Get out of here." You know, kicks him out. You know, so he now is a hero because he's he has luminary agency, which is politeness, good morning, good evening, hello, you know, and shadow agency. And shadow agency is his little sword called Sting, which is, I got a stinger, you know. So if you go against what's right, I now have the ability to use my Sting. Whereas before, he didn't have any shadow agency. That's why Gandalf said, "You're going to be a burglar. You're going to learn how to utilize those shadow sides of yourself for the good." That's what
Mm.
Gandalf wants Bilbo to do. So when he comes back, I call that plenary knowing because it's putting it all together, and it's a mirror of Act One in the same arena, but now he's changed.
So the only way I've ever heard the word plenary is when they talk about a plenary session at a conference, which I guess is when they have all the speakers speaking at one time, or I mean,
Yes.
in the same session. Is there another meaning to plenary besides that?
I just mean it's all of it at once, you know, like everything that you learned in the story
Mm-hmm.
all together. And like at the end of a symphony, you'll get movement one, melody two, but and then in the end, they're all going to be together in harmony, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So they might seem like order and chaos might seem opposed, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Part, propositional knowledge and perspectival knowledge might seem like it's opposed, you know, but by the end of the story, you can see how it's all in harmony. And that's the world that we live in. We, you know, the Trinitarian reality is harmonic. The three
I wonder if
harmonize.
physical development of organisms doesn't run the same. That would be interesting. I got to look into that
Hmm.
to see if biological organisms in their developmental stages go through something similar to, because wouldn't it be something if that story, because obviously it already works in music. We know that music works that way, right? And we know
Mhm.
that story works that way because those are the stories that are compelling. And I know that art works that way because that's the only way that you can produce a work of art that has any value at all. And it may very well be true that the whole universe is put together on that matrix.
Yeah, I think there's something about the rule of three, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Plato's three parts, John Verveke talks about, you know, and most medieval theologians had body, soul, and spirit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
In the New Testament, it's flesh, you know, flesh, psyche, and pneuma. In the Old Testament, it's sarx, um, nephesh, and ruach, you know, body, soul, and spirit. Um, and those might seem opposed. My body is my instincts, and it wants to go straight for its goal state. It doesn't want to wait in line in Starbucks. It wants to cut the line. It doesn't want to wait for someone to finish speaking. It wants to interrupt. It's whatever goes straight for your goal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what is getting trained in your act two. It's like bridling the horse, you know, breaking the horse in. You can't harness the power of the body without controlling the power of the body. You know, the grumbling in the wilderness of the Israelites as an example. Why are we out in the desert? We want to go back where we can have fish. Yes, we were slaves, but we want to go back. That's like my body saying, "Why am I in the gym right now? I want to be back on the couch." You know, this grumbling, that's so the body is trained in that first act.
Mm-hmm.
But then the mind is trained in the perspectival act. The chaotic act is when your aim is corrected, you know. So that's sort of the same thing, but it's happening in your mental world, you know. And then finally, when you put it together, honor and virtue for Plato are in the chest, emotions are in the chest. So the proper use of emotion, anger turns into courage, you know, eros turns into agape, so there's this also aiming of the emotional side of you, the wind side, the spirit side, like Paul Vanderklay talks about school spirit. What is that? Well,
Mhm.
everyone has this pride together about the school, so the spirit side also can be pointed and aimed so that now the body, which is the physical, the power side, the mind and the spirit are all now in harmony.
So when you take the three part as opposed to the five part is just an intro and a conclusion wrapped around the three part.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. If you think of the middle three, you can say, body, mind, spirit, something like
Mhm.
that. And then, but there's a beginning, a beginning and an end, which is your introduction and your denouement, which are on either side of those three. Yeah.
So now that you've been working on this and refining it, do you write stories yourself? Do you plan to write stories, or are you just doing this so that you can more effectively teach it or write a book about it or
Well, Karen, I would love to write a book about it. What I usually do is I road test it by teaching a class because then I can really tell if it works, if it produces better work in the students.
Mhm.
So that's one aspect of it is I'd love to teach it in a class, get a chance to try it out, hone it and refine it even more, and then turn it into a book. Although I think Sean Coyne's book is probably going to be pretty good. It's probably going to be way more comprehensive than mine. Um, but I
Well,
think
is he going to include the scriptural insights that you had though? Because I mean, the way that you talk about the scripture, the stories from the scripture is just so compelling, and it's really illuminating to
well,
see.
no, yeah, I add that part because I have an interest in that,
Yeah.
because I'm interested in the Christian audience and resolving some perceived conflicts for them,
Mhm.
and
Well,
also
and
just
and also, I would think for a non-Christian audience to see the depth and the riches that's in the word, because when you tell the story from that perspective, all of a sudden it just lights up, and I think I think you have to write that book.
I will. No, this is my second mountain, you know, project. I've been traveling around the world, working on movies, having a lot of fun, going on a lot of adventures, and now this is really my mission. So, and yeah, also writing myself. See, I sort of see it as I can take these principles. The StoryGrid program that I'm in is a writing program. I'll probably wind up using it more for screenwriting than for novel writing, but right now I'm doing scene by scene writing. They have a very, very good way of helping you write on the line by line level, the scene level. Right now, I've been mostly talking about the global level, but they're also very, very good at the macro level. That's what I'm still kind of leveling up on. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the global story, but the line by line, macro level, scene by scene, that takes a lot of practice. So that's what I'm working on right now in my own work
Mhm.
is scene writing, nailing every type of scene. And so it'll be a combination of writing a book, teaching it in class, and my own work. And my sense is that, sure, I could write one creative work that might do okay, but imagine I could have as much as 100 students a semester, 200 students a year, possibly. And imagine if it works, if this thing works,
Mhm.
what that would do to the world, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and now so many things. A minute or two ago, you said something about traveling the world, working in movies. And I remembered that the last time you were on, you said you were working on something that you couldn't talk about yet. You were out filming something that you couldn't talk about yet. Can you talk about it? Whatever it
Oh
was you were
man,
filming a couple of years ago.
a couple of years ago,
You said it was really
uh,
big.
I think that project fell through.
Oh, oh.
Um, Sometimes you get opportunities with rich and famous people and powerful
Hmm.
people, and you don't want to say anything about it because you don't
Hmm.
want to jinx it.
Yeah, yeah,
But they don't. You can't count your chickens before they hatch,
yeah,
So
yeah.
sometimes these things fall through, and it's just the nature of it. So I don't remember specifically, But it might have been, I have been sort of hinting at this story stuff as a big thing for me, you know.
Hmm.
And I do have one documentary that I'm still working on. Actually going to Italy to finish up a documentary about urban space, about
Hmm.
walkable cities, which that's still going to come out. That's
Hmm.
a project that I think is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that you showed some of that, at least at one time when you were on here, you showed some of the stuff that you had done on that urban spaces. It looked very, very interesting. Um, what kind of do you usually work on documentaries when you're out, when you're working for the film industry, or are you filming in movies
I
or?
My trade is a camera technician, a
Hmm.
colorist and camera technician. Yeah, that's my union job.
Hmm.
So I work on medium to big movies or TV shows as a
Hmm.
camera guy. I'm in the union, all that. And then
Hmm.
that's my paycheck. And then
Hmm.
my passion is little independent documentaries, writing little books, teaching a little bit here and there.
Hmm.
So what I'm in the process of doing is sort of like expanding the personal projects a little bit more and
Hmm.
not having to do as much of the paycheck ones.
Hmm.
And that's just a matter of time. You gotta, what is it that uh Jordan Hall said? You have to get FU money. And if you want to just do whatever you want. I don't have that. So, but I do, I can sort of go, 3 months on and 3 months off in terms of work and not work, you know.
Well, it's
So,
probably a very good thing you don't have that kind of money because if you did, you wouldn't be teaching those kids who are going to change the world. So,
well, I don't know. Maybe I'd be full time teacher because, I would need to do other work,
hmm.
But yeah, no, I'm in a real good place. I'm going to Italy, you know, having a lot of fun with this institute called the ICS from Toronto, where they teach classes in Italy, and I'm participating as a documentary filmmaker with them.
What does
Um,
ICS stand for?
Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto,
Oh, okay.
and they have a program in Orvieto, Italy, um, that they do 2 weeks every summer, and it's all about medieval art and architecture. They have a sculptor guy that comes, and they have a
Hmm.
studio, and I'm a little bit of an anomaly because I'm going to be filming with my drone and shooting documentary footage, and
Hmm.
not working as a sculptor. But they said, come on along.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of my little European connection, and then working on a sitcom and teaching my one documentary class during the fall and spring, and
Working on a
doing
sitcom.
yeah, just do a 2 day a week fun little sitcom as a camera guy again, which is what
Hmm.
that allows me to teach 1 day a week uh, in the college,
Hmm.
because if I took a movie, it'd be, you know, 60 hours a week and I wouldn't be able to do anything
Hmm.
else. And so I'm phasing out the big movies as a camera guy.
Have you been working on the same sitcom for a while, or is it?
This will be my third season of it. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's what really enabled me to do all this work on
Hmm.
story and teaching in college, was
Hmm.
because it opened up, because sitcoms are only shoot 2 days a week. So it
Hmm.
opened up that time for me.
Because they shoot more than one episode.
One episode a week. They write, do a table read, and block Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then they'll shoot Thursday and Friday. So the camera crew doesn't have to come in except for those last 2 days.
Uh-huh. Well, are they filming live? Is that why they do
Yes.
it that way?
Well, yes, but not always.
Not to a live audience.
On our sitcom, it's funny, we actually have a fake audience of
Oh.
professional laughers. So we don't have to deal with the general public. We can just kind of do our thing and they just take care of
I
the
notice you're
laughs.
not saying the name of it. Is there a reason?
Oh, well, it's not my show. I don't, I find that it's best not to talk about stuff that I work on if I'm not directing it, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because they make us sign an NDA and stuff, so.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
it's on CBS. It's a nice little funny family sitcom.
Mm-hmm. You have such an interesting life because you get to do so many different things, and which is probably why you think outside the box and you've come to all this stuff that you've come to because you were talking about, I don't remember what company you said it was, where they send their people around looking at all the different things that are
Oh,
going on.
3M. Yeah.
3M. Um, I mean, that's usually what companies will do if they're going to train up somebody that they know needs to be really high powers. They'll put them in every single department and get them to learn, because it's so interesting how everything has transferable insights and transferable principles. I've talked about this before, but when I was at the workshop in Olympia, or at the conference in Olympia, um, with TLC, the estuary conference, there was a woman who told me that when she was younger, she used to always ask the same question anytime she'd go to a party. And she would go up to people and she would say, "What is it that you've learned so deeply that you found out there's no bottom?"
Wow.
And the first person who answered that, they said, "Hair." She said, "Hair?" Yes, I'm a beautician. But once you really start studying hair and you have to understand what makes hair grow and what makes hair act the way it does and everything, there's no bottom.
Hmm.
Oh, well, and the next one came up to her and he said, "Milk." Milk. Yes, I'm a dairy farmer. But once you really understand milk, there's,
Hmm.
it just endless amount of things that you have to learn and can learn. And then another guy said paint, and she said, "Oh, are you an artist?" And he said, "No, I'm a painter." But there's no bottom to paint because there's so much to learn. And I think it's that way in everything. So if you go into all these different arenas that you're in, and then you actually care about them and learn what it is that you're doing, you begin to see all these principles line up. And now you are the harmonious hero, right?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to get to do everything that I've gotten to do and meet all the people I've gotten to meet. And you know, yeah, I'm so grateful. You know, I thank God every day for the estuary people. That is such a wonderful project of people all over the world where you can pretty much go anywhere and you can find um, people that want to engage in dialogos, you know. So I don't know. I really think that I'm very excited about our world today and the future of our world, in contact with all these college kids and looking at the hopefulness that they have,
Mm-hmm.
and everything that I'm involved in and all the different networks and stuff. It makes me very, very excited and hopeful and just happy to be a part of it, you know, happy to have the opportunity to be a part of it.
Are you still participating in your local estuary?
Well, I go to Sherry's Estuary, who does the art uh,
Mm-hmm.
Zoom over
Mm-hmm.
Zoom every Wednesday. It's on East Coast time, so I can't attend every time. It's at 4 o'clock at my time. So if I'm working, I can't go.
Mm-hmm.
And that group has some local people from California.
Mm-hmm.
Um, John's group out in Chino is just a very far drive for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of went initially until he had critical mass,
Mm-hmm.
to self-support. And then there's only ever been one other estuary here in Southern California that tried to start, and that was all the way on the west side, and I'm in Pasadena. So right now it's just the online
Mm-hmm.
estuary, and or if I want find myself in the Netherlands, then there's a huge network of estuaries in the Netherlands.
Wow, that's so great. Yeah. I had There's one that started up in my area just before Christmas, and I went most of the times, but he just can't achieve critical mass. Every time I've been, the first time there were 7 people there because Paul came to help get it started. And then there have been times when myself, and one time Harris was here from Greece or from Cyprus, and he drove down from San Francisco to meet up with me. And I said, "Well, let's go to this estuary thing together." So it was me and Horace and this pastor that was leading it. And then the last time I went, there was another guy and myself. And that's it. It just can't seem to get off the ground. I think he doesn't quite know how to advertise it. So I don't know how you, especially in an area like this where everybody is a techie and They all
Hmm.
work long hours, and you have to have some compelling reason to want to go and sit and have a long conversation after you've just worked 10 hours at a
Yeah.
computer, you know. So
Yeah.
um, I don't know what the secret of that is, but it's always a refreshing time. So yeah,
Hmm.
highly
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll find one in Italy too.
Oh, yeah, maybe so,
The
yeah,
2 weeks that you're there, is the whole 2 weeks spent at this conference, or are you going to
well,
be
yeah,
traveling around?
it's a beautiful, gorgeous town called Orvieto, which is about
Mhm.
45 minutes north of Rome on a hill, on a one
Hmm.
of those hilltop medieval towns. It's
Hmm.
exactly the same as it was in the 1100s.
Hmm.
And so basically, you just get on the train, you take the funicular up to the town, and then everything's walkable. There's a couple of excursions that we'll do to Siena and Assisi
Hmm.
via bus. And then there's time on the weekend probably to jet down to Rome or go up to Florence, something
Hmm.
like that. But I'm flying straight back. I would have loved to stay longer, but I'm flying straight back to start the sitcom, you know.
Hmm.
So right as soon as that program is over, I'm heading straight back to do the sitcom. So
Hmm.
this summer wasn't as long, but I would love to spend more time in Europe over the summers moving
Hmm.
forward if I can keep this schedule of teaching
Hmm.
during the fall and doing a sitcom over the fall, and have the summers open.
Hmm. That's really cool. Well, is there anything you'd like to say about your tripartite five 5 part story?
Well,
What do you call it? Do you call it a template or a story?
yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, template,
Hmm.
or a narrative path, maybe, But no, I would just say, keep you guys can keep up on my progress. I'm thinking out loud, thinking in public on my Twitter. One J Wells, I think it's my Twitter.
Hmm.
Justin's Morning Coffee. And and I'll probably put some stuff out on my YouTube channel, which is Justin's Morning Coffee. Initial kind of some assessments of this with movie clips to try, to understand kind of how the structure works. And I'm just going to keep walking forward with it, testing it out, testing it on audiences, testing it with writing. And you guys can feel free to let me know what you think. Let me know if it helped, or if you think anything needs to be changed. And I'm open to dialoguing about it.
Well, you're incredibly generous with your ideas, and it makes for fascinating reading. It really does. So I'll put all that information in the description section, but then also you mentioned in your X feed that you are doing a condensation of The Hobbit into one movie instead of three. Is that going to be something you're going to make publicly available, or?
Unfortunately, I don't think I can. It's a cut that my little sister wanted to do. And
Mhm.
so I'm getting her input, and I have a 3 hour version of The Hobbit. But what I'm going to do is when I put out my lecture on this story structure, I'll be using clips from The Hobbit as illustration of
Mhm.
these 5 acts.
Mhm.
But no, I'm probably going to just do a private party here
Mhm.
and have a viewing. I'll do one for my family over Thanksgiving or something with my nieces and nephews, and we'll say, okay, this is the Wells cut of The
Mhm.
Hobbit. And I'll tell you what, it flows so much better. It's a nice, tight, good, quick moving movie when I cut out all of the stupid stuff.
And
And
it
it's
doesn't
very
leave out
true.
any of the essentials. Now, could you do the same thing with Lord of the Rings, or do you think Lord of the Rings is perfect as it stands?
Um, I don't know. Lord of the Rings is so much better than The Hobbit turned out.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. Um, I think you can do it with, like, the famous one is Topher Grace, the actor from That 70s Show, did it with the three Star Wars prequels. And he
Hmm.
famously had a party where he invited a bunch of the who's who of Hollywood to watch his one clip. And it's legendary because nobody has ever seen it except for if you got the chance to go to that party.
Hmm.
Maybe there's versions of it online somewhere, but I don't know where. Um, and there are fan edits of The Hobbit out there too.
Hmm.
But I just thought, yeah, I want to have a version to show my nieces and nephews that doesn't have such those long, boring parts. that weren't in the book that they just had to put in because they had to make it into 3 movies,
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, I maybe I shouldn't be mentioning it on public that I'm doing this when I can't show it to anybody, but I don't think I can. It's going to be for private use only.
Well, either that or we could all have a secret wish to be part of Justin's family.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin. This has been just wonderful. And thank you for taking time out of a really busy work life that you have, plus all of the creative efforts that you're putting into things. And I just wish for the best for all your students this fall too, and that they're going to be diving into something that's endlessly fascinating. So
Thanks, Karen. I really appreciate you continuing to keep this channel up and going and keep all these wonderful dialogues with people going, and your presence in this virtual TLC community. I really appreciate it.
well, I seem to be winding down, so I don't know. We're getting down to only, I used to do 2 episodes a week, and then I went down to 1 episode a week, and now I'm down to about 3 episodes a month, and we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah,
But it's been a great ride for sure.
yeah,
And one of the benefits of it has been meeting people like you. So thank you so much, Justin.
yeah.
Have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.